Is evil incarnate? Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Idi Amin, Darth Vader, Lord Voldemort, Iago in Shakespeare's Othello, Hannibal Lecter, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, the Joker, your third grade teacher, your father, your ex-husband or wife. You might consider any of these people as the incarnation of evil. We use the term loosely, but what does it really mean? Can evil as a force take flesh, become incarnate in specific human beings? My sermon today, and for the next 2 times I'm at bat here, will be concerned with a simple fact. Bad things happen. And one of the traditional ways humans have explained why bad things happen is to say that something called evil caused them. As most of you know, I've been talking for some time about writing a book on the liberals' take on evil. And next year, about this time, I will be on sabbatical, and it will then be time to put up or shut up. So this series of sermons is the launching pad for that project. The essay on sin from St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans that I read earlier, I heard last week at a funeral I attended in a Lutheran church. It is a bit out of place here, I recognize. You will not hear this passage read in many UU churches, for we are not normally preoccupied with sin. But what Paul is talking about here is a universal human experience. He knows the right thing to do, but always seems to be doing the wrong thing. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. How is this possible? If you hate something, don't you avoid doing it? Yet human life is not governed by logic, however much we would like it to be. Virtually all of us, liberals, conservatives, men, women, young folks, old folks, gays, straights, natives, washashores, will find ourselves at some point doing what we swore we would not do, something we have disapproved when others do, and for which we will reproach ourselves after we do it. Again, how is this possible? We were so firm that doing this, stealing, lying, having the affair, shirking our responsibility was wrong, wrong, wrong. How is it that we are the ones doing it? St. Paul's answer is that it isn't you that does this. But in fact, he says, quote, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells in me. He is in effect denying his own agency. An alien power has taken over and has assumed the driver's seat. Now, Orthodox Christian theology holds that God became flesh in Jesus Christ. This becoming flesh is called incarnation. What Paul seems to be saying in this passage is that there's a different kind of incarnation, an incarnation of evil. Evil is incarnate in the flesh, while good dwells in the spirit and the law. In the Christian tradition, the personification of evil is Satan, the devil. There are 2 good books about how the devil came to be in this tradition. One a few years ago is by Elaine Pagels called The Origins of Satan. And the other just out is by Miguel de la Torre and Albert Hernandez called The Quest for the Historical Satan. The title is a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a takeoff on Albert Schweitzer's famous book of the early 20th century, The Quest for the Historical Jesus. But Satan has a very interesting history. The idea of Satan as the ruler of hell, an underworld of torment in the afterlife and tempter of people, is a Christian one. In the Hebrew Bible, there is a figure called the Satan, but the word means roughly adversary. One passage will illustrate. In the book of Numbers, there's the story of Balaam's ass. It takes place when the Israelites are camped out by the nation of Moab, and the Moabite king feels threatened. So he sends for the prophet Balaam to come and lay a curse on the Israelites. That's B-A-A-L-A-M, Balaam. Well, the Israelites are protected by their covenant with God, and Balaam refuses the first request. But when a second party comes to request, God grants Balaam permission to go, but says, don't say anything until I tell you. In spite of the permission God has just given, God sends an angel to block Balaam's way, a figure with a burning sword. Balaam cannot see the figure, but his donkey can. and refuses to go any further. Balaam gets so mad at the balking donkey that he's about to kill the beast when God finally opens his eyes and he sees that God has sent a messenger to block his way. The verb used to block is le satan, to oppose. Thus, Satan as a word enters the Hebrew Bible both as an emissary from God and an adversary to humans who would thwart God's plan. Not at all an enemy of God's plan, someone used in working out God's plan. A fuller appearance of Satan is in the book of Job, where Satan is a member of God's council. Now right there we might pause, because if the Jews are supposed to believe in one God, what is God doing with a council? As God brags upon the faithfulness of his servant Job, it is Satan who suggests that Job is only faithful to God because God has been good to Job. Satan suggests that they test Job's loyalty by visiting sufferings and torments on him. And God agrees to the test. Now we know how this story plays out, but the thing to note is that it is not Satan that is the author of Job's sufferings and torments. It is God. Satan made the suggestion, but it was only God who had the power to carry it out. God at this juncture is the author of both good and evil. Now in the middle of writing the Hebrew Bible, the Jews had a trauma to contend with called the Babylonian captivity. The whole nation was forced marched to Babylon in the 6th century BCE. They prayed for relief, and the original vision of a Messiah, a person who will arise and throw off the yoke and lead the Israelites to freedom, dates from this experience. And in fact, the Messiah finally came. Not Jesus of Nazareth, but Cyrus the Great of Persia, who defeated the Babylonians and led the Israelites return to Judea. In that exchange, the Israelites were exposed to Persian religious ideas, and that means Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism holds that the world is a titanic battleground between the forces of good and the forces of evil. The supreme god Ahura Mazda was benevolent, but there were two subordinate deities. Spenta Manu was a manifestation of Ahura Mazda and promoted truth, unity, goodness, and balance in the cosmos. But he was locked in an eternal cosmic battle with his nemesis, Angra Mainyu, who promoted lies, darkness, disunity, and imbalance. The cosmic dualism of Zoroastrianism had an effect on Jewish thought. It isn't expressed in the text of the Hebrew Bible itself, so much as in the other literature that arose around the last 4 centuries before the Common Era, which collected under the title pseudepigrapha. One of my favorite words, pseudepigrapha. These writings attest to the mindset at the time of the Christian Gospels, written between the year 70 and the year 100 of the Common Era, or 50 years after the life of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all had Jesus' ministry begin with his baptism in the Jordan by John the Baptist, the recognition by God that Jesus is his son, and then Jesus' retreat into the desert. It is that retreat that Christians remember in the season of Lent, 40 days of fasting and prayer. And during that time, Jesus is tempted by Satan. Jesus being hungry, Satan suggests that Jesus uses magical powers to turn the stones into bread. He then takes him to the top of the temple and suggests he throw himself down to allow angels to break his fall and demonstrate his power to the people. He then takes him up to a high mountain and shows him the kingdoms of the world and offers to give him political reign over these kingdoms if Jesus will bow down and worship him. In each instance, Jesus refuses the temptations with a quote from the Hebrew Scripture. Interestingly enough, it is a quote from Deuteronomy each time. Satan had been established in the popular imagination by Jesus' time, for when Jesus begins his ministry of exorcising unclean spirits from those possessed by him, the Pharisees questioned by whose authority he was acting and suggested he might be acting for the devil. To which Jesus replies, "Can Satan cast out Satan?" In his mission instructions to his disciples, Jesus clearly sets out that they are acting against Satan. In short, these narratives give us the Christian conception of the devil as an adversary to God, representing the forces of evil. This devil could become incarnate in humans and cause them to do evil things. At the same time, the conception of hell developed. For the ancient Hebrews, Sheol was just a place of repose for the dead, not a place of punishment. It was like Hades was to the Greeks. But by the time the Gospels were written, it had become a place of torment, the prison of souls who was separated from God. Elaine Pagels, in her books, The Origin of Satan, shows why it was that the Gospel writers, writing half a century after the life of Jesus, cast the narrative of Jesus' life as a titanic battle between good and evil. They had to do this in order to sell Jesus as the Messiah, since as a political leader, Jesus was a conspicuous failure. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke made a political failure into a moral success by putting the devil into the story early on in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and then reintroducing him at the crucifixion and casting the story as Jesus' victory over evil. Our storylines ever since have followed this one. We love and will buy plot lines which set up a battle between good and evil and ignore those that don't. In the succeeding centuries, the devil attained greater and greater prominence in Christian countries and plays a central role as well in the other great monotheistic faith, Islam, which we will not have time to examine here. For the religious leaders who came to these shores in the 17th century, both Pilgrim and Puritan, the devil was very real and was often to be found in someone whose religious opinions differed from your own. Artemus Ward, a Revolutionary War general, once said, "I believe we are descended from the Puritans, who nobly fled from a land of despotism to a land of freedom, where they would not only enjoy their own religion, but prevent everyone else from enjoying his." Thus, the Plymouth colony in its first 5 years deported some teenagers back to England because it was discovered that they had masturbated, and tore down a maypole erected by Thomas Morton. The Puritans to the north famously prosecuted and executed several young women as witches. Fear of the devil was very prominent in the emotional energy of the Great Awakening in the early part of the 18th century in New England. And that was the emotional upheaval that gave rise to both Unitarianism and Universalism. The Unitarians embraced the tolerant view of the world based on the emergence of science and rationality. The Universalists went further, abolishing hell altogether. The Universalists pointed out that if we think God is active in the world and was incarnate in Jesus, and we think that evil is active in the world and incarnate in the devil, we're not practicing monotheism, but ditheism. We've got two gods to worry about. Universalists insisted that only God had reality. This insistence had practical consequences. In the early 19th century, Universalists were not allowed to sit on juries or testify in court because they didn't believe in hell, and it was thought that without a fear of eternal punishment, the oaths required would have no meaning for them. Universalism made some serious inroads on the belief in the devil in the early 19th century, but not as great as a development completely outside of religion. In the late 19th century, it was Sigmund Freud who offered an alternative explanation for why humans espouse one course of action but do another. Freud postulated that our minds were not unitary, but had three parts: ego, superego, and id. Much of what actually motivates us is in the unconscious mind. Our drives for sex and power are very powerful and stay with us for life. And the process of growing up is a process of sublimating these drives, which we never do with complete success. Thus, if you are sitting in your pew right now and shocking, lustful thoughts come into your mind about someone with whom you have no real-life sexual connection at all, you might explain these as the devil in your flesh, but a century after Freud, you would be much more likely to explain these as the natural workings of your libido, a characteristic of being human. Freud's psychoanalysis has permeated the culture to the point where we are quite accustomed to explaining our actions as a result of unconscious forces, sometimes stemming from our childhood. In Jesus' day, he practiced exorcism and trained his disciples to do the same, casting out demons from those possessed by them. Dr. Freud, on the other hand, discovered talk therapy. If the patient can free associate, pay attention to her dreams, and otherwise bring the unconscious process to consciousness, the patient can understand and liberate herself from these bothersome impulses. Now, Freud was strongly anti-religious. As De La Torre and Hernandez put it, quote, religion, Freud maintained, was an illusion with no future. It was as if psychoanalysis had invited Satan into therapy and there, on the psychologist's couch, had tricked Satan into believing he did not have power over the human spirit, unquote. Freud's most brilliant disciple, Carl Jung, broke with him over this anti-religious element. Jung believed that the insights of psychoanalysis could be squared with the traditional ideas of the soul. Moreover, Freud's optimistic faith in the ability of secular science to achieve human happiness seemed naive in the light of the horrors that Jung lived through, who lived several decades beyond Freud. Quote, in the face of such atrocities and terrors as those caused by 2 world wars, Germany's descent into the abyss of Nazism and the Holocaust, and America's development and deployment of atomic weapons, Jung became one of the 20th century's most ardent protesters against the denial of evil in the cosmos, criticizing modern civilization's obsession with absolute good and its denial of the demonic realities of the dark side of human nature, unquote. So in a sense, Freud de-incarnated evil and Jung reincarnated it, not as a supernatural force, but as an inherent property in humans. This was reinforced near the end of Jung's life by Hannah Arendt's very influential meditation on the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was the architect of Hitler's final solution. But in observing his trial in 1961, Arendt came away with the surprising realization that he was the most ordinary of men. Quote, the satanic exists not because there are a few villains among humanity, a few who are vicious or cruel, a few who reject God or Christianity. The trouble with Eichmann, Arendt writes, was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, that they were, and still are, terribly and terrifyingly normal, unquote. So let's return to the question with which we started. Is evil incarnate? If evil exists in the world at all, the Holocaust is for most of us the paradigm of evil. Yet Arendt's observations lead to the conclusion either that it does not reside in the breast of Adolf Eichmann, or that it resides in the breast of all of the rest of us as well. At least each of us is a potential Eichmann. We don't want to ignore or in any way gloss over the terrible atrocity that was the Holocaust, and we honor those still among us, some in this room, who put their lives on the line as young men in order to bring it to an end. But where precisely is the evil located? We need to know that in order to prevent it from happening again. My own suspicion is that there's something wrong with our conception of evil. But if evil has to be located somewhere in the picture of the Holocaust, I would locate it not in the person of Hitler or Himmler or Eichmann, but in the system they created and the values which led them to its creation. Theologian James Luther Adams has said that the decisive forms of virtue in our time are institutional ones. But he might have said the same thing about evil. If evil is incarnate, it is incarnate in institutions and systems and values. This is why Pete Seeger's take on the devil in his song, Old Devil Time, is comfortable for most of us. Pete has been a yo-yo for much of his life, and the devil he sees is not a person or group of persons, but the negative emotions which we all try to fight as we live with one another and work to build a beloved community. Hate, fear, pain, and that great thief of our attachments, time itself. And the song acknowledges that life is a daily struggle with this dark side. As William Blake says, joy and woe are woven fine. You can no more separate pain and hate and fear from existence than you can love and beauty and joy. We will rise to fight these devils of pain and fear and hate, of homophobia and racism and sexism and poverty and war. Rise to struggle against them one more time, for the struggle gives meaning to our days and incarnates our religious values. For those of us who hold that God is the creator of all things, It makes a lot more sense to say that God is the author of evil as well as good things, rather than say the good things come from God and the bad things come from Satan. In that, I think the Hebrew Bible was right, and Christianity got it wrong. Evil is incarnate only to the extent that goodness is. Let me say that again. Evil is incarnate only to the extent that goodness is. And if it is incarnate in Hitler or Eichmann, it is incarnate in each of us as well. We know where our struggle lies, and the devil is largely irrelevant. As Pete Seeger wrote, no storm nor fire can ever beat us down. No wind that blows but carries us farther on. And you who fear, oh lovers, gather round, and we will rise to sing it one more time.